Well, as Mika mentioned, I'm Samidh Chakrabarti, and I lead our civic engagement product team at Facebook. And today I'm just going to take you on a whistle-stop tour of how we're thinking about improving civic discourse on Facebook and the challenges associated with it. But I actually just want to start by thanking Mika and Andrew for inviting me to speak today, because I've actually spent my whole career working in civic tech. I've been PDF many times in the audience, and they're a large part of why I got into the field in the first place. Because back in 2004, they wrote a manifesto that literally changed my life, and here it is. They wrote, "A new force built on and around the internet is rising. The cost of finding like-minded souls, banding together and speaking to the powerful has dropped to almost zero, and that networked voices are reviving the civic conversation. Personal democracy, where everyone is a full participant, is coming." They wrote this in 2004, 14 years ago. And this is what inspired me, and I think it's probably what inspired all of you to get into this in the first place. And it's this bold vision that actually ultimately led me to Facebook 3 years ago, because I knew that Facebook could end up being a critical part of the civic infrastructure. But we have to remember that even though Facebook is an intimate part of people's civic life these days, it wasn't always obvious that this is the role that it was going to play. So back in 2004, the Facebook, as it was then known, was just an online directory that connected people at colleges. Really nothing more, nothing less than that. And it was never originally designed for civic discourse. But connection is a really powerful thing. And soon people started to use it to talk about politics, to organize, and to do all kinds of other civic activities. And by 2011, when Facebook was playing a critical role in things like the Arab Spring, we all heralded it as this sort of technology for liberation. And we all thought of social media as a technology that could connect us to the public sphere, that it could inform us, that it could challenge us by seeing new points of view, that it could mobilize us to take civic action and ultimately empower us as citizens, especially those of us who may have been more marginalized by society's gatekeepers. But now let's skip forward to present times, when 2 billion people are channeling their energy into a platform that was never designed for civic engagement. And the platform is being stretched in really unexpected, unanticipated, and emergent ways. And I think its shortcomings have become abundantly clear to us all, whether we're talking about misinformation, echo chambers, or foreign interference in elections. And I think this is causing all of us to now question the fundamental premise, not just of social media, but of our whole civic tech movement. And that is, can a more connected world be a more civic world? This is a deep question that's caused us at Facebook to have a broader sense of responsibility than we've ever had before. And we know we need to not just amplify the positive elements of civic discourse on the platform, but also prevent the abuse of the platform from being amplified. And I'm well aware that many of you in this room may be very skeptical and may no longer believe, if you ever did, that social media can be a force for good in the world. And so I actually just wanted to share with you like an insider's view of how we're trying to tackle these problems and show you why I think through more civic-centric design, we can make good on the promise of social media. And so let's start by defining what exactly is healthy civic discourse. Well, rather than decide on our own, we often ask our community what they think through a combination of focus groups and in-context surveys, like you see here. And what we found is that all around the world, people are actually remarkably consistent, and they want the same thing. And that word "same" is actually a convenient acronym for the types of things that people are asking for in their civic discourse. So they want safety, authenticity, meaningfulness, and effectiveness. So safety meaning they want conversations to be civil, not offensive, or filled with hate speech. They want authenticity. They want real people and real information behind the conversations. And they want the conversations to be meaningful. They want conversations that encourage and build their sense of community and not those that divide. And then they want the conversations to be effective. They want them to have real impact on public policy and other dimensions of civic life. So to illustrate how we're thinking through each of these challenges, I'm just going to go through 4 quick case studies, one in each area. And let's start with safety, where really one of the most vexing problems is how can we prevent online speech from inciting real-world violence. So as Kenya readied for its election last year in August, there were widespread fears that election-related violence could erupt, just like it did in their 2007 election, where tens of thousands of people died. So we were concerned that politically motivated hate speech on our platform could erupt into real-world violence. So to be clear, hate speech and credible threats of violence have no place on Facebook. They're a violation of our community standards, and we remove them when they're reported to us. And traditionally, we've thought of people on Facebook as being our best eyes and ears for finding these kinds of problems. And it's always been pretty easy for people to report any piece of content, like you see here, for violating our community standards. And we get on the order of 1 million of these reports every day, and we try to process them all. So historically, this seemed like a pretty good approach to trying to find content problems on the platform. But as the election approached, we started seeing a 4x increase in Kenyans reporting this kind of harmful content. And given just how highly charged the election environment was, we wondered whether we'd actually be able to remove this kind of content quickly enough. And so we knew we needed to take a different approach than Facebook has traditionally in order to protect against this potential kind of harm. And thanks to advancements in AI, we were able to try out more proactive reporting. So rather than waiting reactively for people to flag things for us, we tried to remove harmful content before people had reported it. So here's how it worked. So we did this by training machine learning classifiers to look for Kenya-specific political slurs. The AI system then proactively flagged suspect content, and then we passed those reports along to a country-specific team of people who would manually review them before taking them down. And you know, this approach allowed us to move a lot more quickly, efficiently, and cover a lot more content, and it ended up being 60% more accurate than reports submitted by people. And this is the kind of technique that we use in elections all over the world to protect against a wide range of potential harms proactively. And I think it represents a really significant change of posture in how we think about civic safety on Facebook. So let's go to authenticity next. So here, the key problem is, like, how do you make sure that the people who are involved in civic conversations really are who they say they are? And this is particularly important because who says something is often just as important as what they're saying. So as you all know, in 2016, the election in the US showed the real dangers of this kind of inauthentic civic content. And we at Facebook were too slow to really realize what was happening on our platform, but we've been trying to make up for lost time. And we're constantly improving. So we now stop 1 million fake accounts every day at the point of registration, most of which are bots. But I want to talk about an even tougher problem than bots, and that's how do you stop inauthentic accounts that are run by real people? And so the approach that we're taking to this is actually one of transparency. So we believe it's really important to know who's behind the political content that people see. And this is especially true of ads, where this is often how bad actors build up their audiences in the first place. So that's why we're taking the extraordinary step this year of verifying the identities of all political advertisers on Facebook, starting with the US. So that means that unverified advertisers who try running political ads will have their ads blocked. And we use a level of identity verification that's sort of similar to when you open up a bank account. So we ask for a government photo ID, last 4 digits of social security number, and then we send you a letter in the mail to your physical address to ensure that you are where you say you are. And then we're also making all political ads available for 7 years in a searchable archive. And we realize we have an opportunity here to bring a new level of accountability to the political ecosystem. And that's why the archive actually shows the full ad creative of all the different versions of an ad, the amount spent, and demographic information about the ad's audience. And you know, when we started piloting ad transparency more generally in Canada earlier this year, advertisers told us that it was kind of changing the way that they think about their political messaging, because they now knew that the whole world would see the full picture of the messages that they're putting out there. And I believe that that's a good thing, and I hope that researchers, journalists, and other watchdog groups make good use of this kind of system. And if you haven't actually played with the ad archive, you can go try it out, and I encourage you to do it because I think you'll find it really fascinating. So let's move to meaningfulness next. So people want civic conversations that build their sense of community and that don't divide. And Facebook's mission is literally to bring the world closer together, so we share this goal. And that means not amplifying polarization. So the causes of polarization are really complicated, including a fragmented media environment, economic inequality plays a role, and a lot more. But we feel a sense of responsibility to do our part to make sure that we don't make this problem worse. So one feature that we tested in this area was called perspectives. So this product makes it really easy for people to compare the platforms of different political parties around election time. And it was our hope that this could help alleviate some of the echo chambers and give people more empathy for other points of view. But how do you actually know if features like this have any real impact on polarization? Well, we've been investing really heavily in research to try to measure polarization so that one day we may be able to answer questions like this and to evaluate their impact. Because if we can't measure it, we'll never really know. So one behavioral metric that we use for polarization that we've been developing is something that we call preferential interactions. So it attempts to measure how much more likely people are to like posts from friends who share similar news preferences as those who engage with dissimilar news. So the idea being that in a polarized world, people form closer bonds with people that they agree with. So by looking at whether people are interacting more with people that they agree with, maybe we can start to measure polarization, maybe even in real time. And it's really early days here, and we have a lot more research to do to validate this kind of approach. But I think it shows how computational social science and innovations in that field are going to be really critical to us being able to understand these problems in more depth. So I actually see this as a first step towards civic health metrics for tech products. So my dream is that all product teams at Facebook will one day have a dashboard that doesn't just let them see how people are interacting with their products and how many people are interacting with their products, but also see how their products are impacting the quality of civic conversations as well. So I hope that we can get there. Let's move on to effectiveness now. So in particular, how can digital interactions with politicians be more effective? So it turns out that millions of people are interacting with their representatives on Facebook, but relatively few of them actually get a response. And this is pretty sad because getting a response lets you know that you've been heard. And it's more indicative that you may have influenced policy. So, we conducted many focus groups with politicians over the years to find out why aren't they responding much when people contact them. And what we found out is that they told us that they don't actually believe that the people contacting them are their constituents. So we thought, what if we let people opt in to showing that they live in a politician's district? Will that drive more replies? So we call this feature a constituent badge. And it allows people to put a special icon by their name when they comment on their own representative's posts. It's right there. So we started rolling this out in the US last year, and we were trying to figure out if it actually worked. So here's what we found. So unfortunately, there was no effect on politician reply rates, which is disappointing. However, amongst constituents, something remarkable was happening. So there were more repeat interactions. So when somebody claimed the badge, they would actually interact with their representative more than they would before. That there were more civil and substantive comments when people claimed a badge. And there was more participation from women. And this is really important because we've previously shared that women are underrepresented when it comes to public political discourse on Facebook. And so features like this actually help to correct that kind of imbalance. And so that was a huge moment, in my career when I saw for the first time that civic-centric design can actually impact and create greater civic outcomes at a really broad scale. But none of this is as quite as easy as I've made it sound, and we know we have a long way to go in this journey, and that civic discourse on Facebook is really far from where we need it to be, where we all need it to be. And there are a lot of problems that we haven't even started to make a dent in yet, and even more that we don't even really understand. And pulling off this kind of work is really challenging. So a lot of people ask me if Facebook's commercial motives are what makes this kind of work hard, whether what's good for the business actually undermines what's good for people. So I just wanted to say that in my experience, that has never been the case. In all the product reviews I've done with Mark and other execs, I've never been asked to choose between these goals. We've never been told, for example, to sacrifice people's safety in order to chase a profit. Because we all know that in the long term, if we don't do what's good for people, we won't even have a business. So I want to actually talk about what makes it even more difficult. And that's really what makes it especially challenging is when the values that people have actually conflict with each other, when values conflict with other values. And so I just want to give you a few examples of this based upon the product examples that I already just went through. So some people may see efforts like our constituent badges as promoting more equitable engagement. But others may see it as attempts for social engineering that actually artificially skew natural discourse. Some people may see our efforts to depolarize, such as the perspectives unit, as laudable. But others may think that they cross the line into paternalism over people's media diets. And some people applaud our transparency efforts as ways of creating more authenticity and a more genuine conversation. But others worry that a lack of anonymity could actually threaten vulnerable groups who need secrecy in order to avoid persecution. And many people call on us to do a lot more about safety, to keep people safe on our platform, while others worry that this actually just amounts to censorship and actually undermines freedom of speech. And I believe actually all of these points have merit. And we don't pretend to know actually what the answer is in all these cases. And these dilemmas are not straightforward. So to give you a sense of how tough this can be, let's do a thought experiment together on this particular issue of safety versus censorship. So imagine an election is coming up and you have a technology that can proactively catch a lot more violence-inducing hate speech than just listening for reports. So you have two choices here. You can optimize for safety and deploy the system and proactively remove them. Or B, you kind of worry about being a source of interference potentially yourself, and so you do nothing proactively and you only remove stuff reactively once it's been reported. So I want to do a show of hands. Who would choose A?
Who decides what gets removed automatically and proactively?
We'll get into one level of detail. We're going to do a multi-step process here, but I want everybody to make a decision here when we vote, because you need to commit. Not taking an action is also a deliberate choice as well, and you're ultimately responsible. So raise your hand if you want to do A. Now raise your hand if you want to do B. Okay, there's already disagreement here, right? Now, what if I told you that the proactive system is 98% accurate and it catches 10 times more harmful content? Who would choose A? And who would choose B? Okay. Now what if I told you that those 2% of errors actually took down posts from one political party 3 times more often than they did the others? So you actually might be disproportionately harming innocent posts that are coming from this party's supporters. But it's only 2% of the time. Who would choose A? And who would choose B? And several of you have stopped voting. That's interesting. Okay. We haven't even actually talked about how would you figure out what somebody's political party is while still respecting their privacy. So there are more questions that are embedded in here. I want you to raise your hand if you actually switched your vote at some point during this exercise. Okay. So all of you guys actually have a pretty good idea of why my hair is gray. This was a fictitious example, but we have to balance concerns like these every day as we strive to improve our platform. And we know we aren't always going to get it right because, problems like this have actually been debated by philosophers since the beginning of civilization. And so that's why we need your help. We can't do this ourselves, and I'd even say we shouldn't do it ourselves. So if you actually like discussing hard questions like this and helping us work through it, please come to our workshop this afternoon, where my colleagues Crystal and Katie will tackle a lot of these questions in a lot more depth in the context of election integrity, and we really welcome your thoughts. So in closing, let me just acknowledge that this has been a tough couple of years, and not just for Facebook, but I think for all of us who believe that technology can empower the voiceless. We're basically reckoning with the fact that this optimistic vision of personal democracy that we've had is at risk. And that's, I think, really deeply uncomfortable for all of us in this room. But the answer can't be to retreat from this vision and to try to de-democratize. We shouldn't be making it harder for people to connect. We shouldn't be making it harder for people to share their voice. Because without social media, a lot of movements like Me Too may never happen. And so rather than dwell on the downsides, we need to fix them. And I hope you see what I've shown you today as real evidence that this is possible. That it's possible to catch harm before it's too late. That it's possible to change incentives through transparency. That it's possible to make intractable problems measurable. And that it's possible to give people a greater sense of permission to speak. So I really want all of you guys to stay hopeful because we need you. We really need you on this journey because I think only together can we make a more connected world, a more civic world too. So thank you.
Take a seat quickly. I got 2 minutes for questions because you went a little over, but I wanted to try and get 1 or 2 audience questions in. And I just want to say, we've actually deprecated that manifesto. We took it out of the program this year, and not because the ideas weren't noble, but because I don't think we thought that these platforms could be weaponized in the way that they've been weaponized, and that's what our next speaker is going to be talking about. And so the question I was going to ask you is, to what degree are you worrying not just about individuals who maybe have extreme points of view, but that state actors have decided to, in effect, invade our space, right? Or invade that there are malicious forces that are much bigger than just the individual, the collective effects of lots of disparate individuals. How much is that on your mind as you try and think about what do we do to try and ameliorate this?
With the foreign actor problem specifically, I mean, it's top of mind. Actually, in many ways. It's actually one of many issues. I think we covered a whole range of issues, and this is just a subset of the issues that we think about. And when you talk about elections in particular, the mix of problems that you see is really different depending on which country an election is taking place. So I think in places like the U.S., where the foreign interference problem is relatively large problem relative to other countries, it's one we think about a lot more.
Okay. So I'm going to go very quick to get one of these in. Do you think that, in addition to the things that you just described, could Facebook consider really rethinking its mission and deciding to slow its growth? For example, don't make it so easy for everybody to connect to everybody else. Really limit the scale of people's friend groups to just the 150 people who are intimately closely in their actual community. Is that even conceivable? Because it seems like Facebook won this competition to scale up to 2.2 billion, and that's so fundamental to its success that something like that couldn't be conceived.
Well, yes, I think everything is on the table. And all of these things need to be considered with their pros and cons associated with them and so forth. And I think Facebook actually did change its formal mission about a year ago, a little over a year ago, to recognize that connection on its own wasn't enough. That actually just the term connection is too value neutral for a mission to be. And so that's why we've moved beyond merely thinking about connection to thinking more about how do we make sure that people can we can bring people closer together through connection. And so I think we did rethink our mission, tried to have a more explicit statement of values around it, and like drastic changes to the platform are definitely possible, can be considered, and the pros and cons of them need to be debated.
Great. Well, we're looking forward to getting into that conversation this afternoon with you at your workshop. Folks, bring your questions there and get into it with Samidh and the rest of the team here from Facebook. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right.